Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anna Pask, and I'm a legal director at Owen Mitchell, specialising in serious and catastrophic personal injury work. Welcome to our webinar today, which focuses on the benefits of wearing a hard hat within the workplace and the life-changing consequences that can occur for failure to do so. We've chosen to put the webinar on this week as it falls within Hard Hat Awareness Week, which is an initiative that was set up by Chris Tidy, one of our speakers today, in order to drive awareness of brain injury and encourage best practice around safety equipment. So just some housekeeping before we start. Thank you for those who've already submitted questions. You can submit additional questions through the session via the Q&A function on your screen, and we'll answer them all at the end. When you submit your questions, please can you include your name and email address, and then if we don't get to the question, we'll respond directly to you after the webinar. We will be recording the webinar and we'll send a copy out to you afterwards. And towards the end of the session, we'll also post a feedback link. So please can you just take 2 minutes to give us some feedback? It would be much appreciated. So our first speaker today is Chris Tidy. Chris has his own specialist training and consultancy company and works as a consultant for various PPE and safety companies. Chris has rapidly become an expert in head injuries and its mechanism, and Chris strongly believes that head protection needs to be addressed globally through safety standards, giving greater protection to the workforce. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks very much for the introduction. So for me, hi everyone, Chris Tidy. I'm sure a lot of you know me. For those who don't, please always send me a message on LinkedIn and get to know me. So yeah, as Anna said, Hard Hat Awareness Week was established around 4 years ago now, and mainly sort of centered around best practice around head protection. And tried to get our community to understand really, you know, what a head injury actually is, and what a brain injury is, and how debilitating those type of injuries can actually be. We've done lots of things over the past sort of 4.5 years around head injuries and brain injuries. We've worked a lot with Imperial College. We've worked a lot with Headway. We've worked a lot with Silver Lining, the brain injury charity. So we do lots of stuff around that. So I've got a few slides just to go through. I won't take up too much of your time because I think it's super important that we hear from Headway, and we also hear from Imperial College as well. So without further ado, I'll get onto my slides. If you could do the next slide for me, please, Tez. Thank you. So it all started with this gentleman, with Phineas Gage, because he became the first person to actually produce evidence that damage to the brain could affect our behaviour and our personalities way back in 1848. He was actually a railway worker and was selling some explosives and had an accident. I won't describe the accident to you in graphic detail, but it obviously damaged his brain. And from then, even though he survived the injury, his attitude changed. He became very erratic in his personality and in his behaviour, and therefore we got sort of a good, real understanding of what damage to the brain can actually do. So this is quite a severe injury, but nevertheless, you know, there's lots of people that suffer minor head injuries as well as obviously major brain injuries that work in the workplace. So yeah, so that's Phineas. Next slide, please, Des. Thanks. So just a quick explanation really of what a head injury actually is. So it's sort of any sort of injury to your brain, skull, scalp. You know, it could be just sort of bumping your bumps on a bit of scaffolding, and anything from a major injury from a falling object or perhaps from falling over. So these can range from a mild bump or bruise to a traumatic brain injury, as I said. And these common injuries may include concussions, skull fractures in some extreme cases, and then just down to minor scalp wounds and things like that. So the consequences and treatments obviously vary quite greatly, depending on what caused your head injury and exactly how severe it is. I think it's super important that we really sort of teach this within inductions to get people to have a better understanding of what a head injury is and what a brain injury actually is. So next slide, please, Tess. Thanks. So two of the types of injury are a traumatic brain injury, which is an injury to the brain caused by trauma to the head. And then we have another group, minor head injuries and concussions. So this could be made up of concussion or post-concussion syndrome. So when we talk about specifically around concussions, you may not always feel the immediate effect of a concussion. Sometimes it can take 2, 3, maybe even 4 days to actually surface. So if we run to the next slide, Tess. So causes of some traumatic brain injuries, minor head injuries and concussions can obviously be falls. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the slides. Vehicle accidents, being struck by an object, so something maybe falling onto your head, striking your head against an object, slips, trips and falls, that's quite prolific at the moment when you look at industrial accident statistics, and that could be falling from height, maybe one step up a ladder, which is classified really as working at height, to tripping and just falling over something while you're walking across the ground. And of course, this would include sports injuries as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. So quite a long list of what mild traumatic brain injuries can cause. I won't go through every single one, but obviously headaches, some nausea, vomiting, loss of consciousness, memory or concentration problems, feeling depressed or anxious, difficulty sleeping, sleeping more than usual. So these are obviously flags of that there may be something wrong. But I'd always encourage that if you've had a head injury to be aware of it. But also if you start feeling any of these sort of symptoms to get it checked out. It's super important. We can't see inside our brain, so make sure that you get it checked out by a professional if you start feeling sort of any or some of these symptoms. So just always be wary of that. Next slide, please, Tess. So we look at statistics, and you may see some of these later on in other people's slides, but there's estimated around 57 million traumatic brain injuries that occur worldwide annually. In the US alone, approximately 1.7 million people are diagnosed with TBI each year. And more importantly, the financial loss is over 75 billion. So there's always a cost to pay with these injuries, not just the person that's obviously suffered the injury, but maybe a cost to the company from the injury as well. We see lots of posts on LinkedIn from the HSE where they've obviously pursued fines against companies for malpractices around safety. So always important that there's always a financial burden or costs to these type of injuries. Industrial workers are at a significant risk of TBIs, according to recent analysis. So TBIs account for about 17.9% of all TBIs. And in the United Kingdom alone, there were over 348,000 work-related TBI cases admitted to hospital in 2019-2020. That's the latest figures from Headway Statistics. And falls, as I'd said to you earlier, we'll sort of touch on this. Falls have been identified as the leading cause of work-related TBIs, accounting 50 to 70% of all cases. Now, as I'd stipulated earlier, that's not always falls from height. Yes, they make up quite a large amount, but there's also slips, trips and falls from the same level as well. Next slide, please, Tess. So there are two types of impacts that can occur. So there's a straight line or a linear impact. So that's something falling directly, or maybe something hitting you directly, or when you fall over, you fall and hit your head in a linear fashion, which is possibilities of that are very, very slim generally when you fall over. And generally when something hits you, it tends to hit you at an angled impact, what we call an oblique impact. So next slide, please, Tez. So our brain should cope fairly well with linear impacts or forces. But unfortunately, our brain can't cope as well with angled impacts or rotational forces. So I always, when I explain this, I always think of a woodpecker pecking a bit of wood that sort of pecks constantly in that direction, and pretty much it doesn't sort of affect the head or the brain too much. But if you take the brain and you twist it in a direction and you apply sort of rotational forces, then that's when we can see some further damage to the actual brain, and one of the largest causes of concussions. Next slide, please, Tez. So looking at linear forces will generally produce, obviously, an impact. But if you just click the button again for me, Tez. That's it, lovely. And they'll primarily cause things like fractures, contusions, so bruising on the surface. But if you apply a linear force plus a rotational force, because you always have a combination of both, although rotational is the primary force, you'll always have that very small amount of linear. Then the end results for that can be more severe. And as I'd said, concussion, things like subdural hematomas, or things like diffuse axonal injury, where we've twisted the brain and damaged like the base of the brain. So with rotational forces, some of these effects can be more severe. And interestingly enough, to know that there's lots of helmets on the market, but not that many helmets that can sort of give you protection or some protection against rotational forces as well as linear impacts. And in all honesty, when you have these type of impacts, it always tends to edge towards the angled impacts rather than the linear impacts, although wearing a helmet in the first place will give you obviously much, much better protection. So it's always, first port of call, make sure you're wearing the helmet in the first instance. Next slide, please, Tez. So hard hats and technology, it's changing. The standards are going to be changing. In 397 will be changing towards the end of this year. There will be a new updated version that will be released, and within that there'll be the call for better impact protection, obviously, which will help yourselves. There'll also be a call for some mandatory chin straps. I get a lot of feedback from people about wearing chin straps. It's all about making sure that the helmet stays on the head. That's the most important thing, because if the helmet isn't on the head and it's falling off and then subsequent impacts occur, then obviously some more severe damage can occur. So chin straps are a way of making sure that the helmet stays on the head, that you're not reliable just on this ratchet at the back, that the helmet stays there. Make sure you adjust the chin strap so it's comfortable. It doesn't have to be super tight. A lot of people pull it, too tight. But chin straps are super important. There are more comfortable, more ergonomic helmets on the market. I just wish people would invest more in their head protection. I think that's super important. If you buy a helmet for £50 instead of the average market value of helmets that people currently take, which is about £10, you're talking about spending about 7p a day over like a 2-year lifespan of a helmet. I see a lot of people that use a helmet for 3-4 weeks, throw it away. It's plastic. That's no good. We have to think about looking after our safety helmets, our hard hats, spending more money, which gives us better protection, but also more comfortability. It's more ergonomic. It feels better because you're wearing it for long periods of time. I really do understand that. Even if you spend £100 on the helmet, you're only talking at 14 pence a day over a 2-year life cycle. But if you look at the majority of helmet manufacturers, you can keep a helmet in service if you look after it for up to 5 years. So if you really do look after it, you can stretch that expenditure over a longer period of time. There's a lot more environmentally friendly helmets that are coming out onto the market, likes of the Centurion Nexus E Protect that's come onto the market, super environmentally friendly. And of course, that's a very hot topic. I really do understand that. But the main thing is, again, that you're protecting this, ultimately. Protection against linear and angled impacts. There are helmets on the market that do both of those as well. And there's a lot of talk around compatibility, so making sure that helmets are more compatible with ear protection, with those chin straps, with eyewear and things like that, so it doesn't feel as bulky and as cumbersome. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of integrated spectacles and things like that, so you've always sort of got that eye protection with you. But as I said, please invest in your hard hat and protect this greatest asset. One of my great friends, Luke from Headway, said that we spend, £1,000, £1,500 on a mobile phone, and we spend, £50 on a cover to protect that mobile phone, and we take pictures and everything, is on that mobile phone. But if something happens to that mobile phone, we back it up to the cloud. We can put it onto another mobile phone. Sometimes we lose a little bit of the data, but the majority of it, stays. But if we damage that, we lose it for life. We can never get it back again. We can't back it up. It's not something we can just upload to the cloud. So it's super important that you look after this asset, and you really do, invest in your head protection. Next slide, please, Tess. Okay, so leading the world to safer helmets, I mentioned, there were helmets on the market. Centurion Safety have been very prolific in taking on board technologies such as MIPS, which is a multi-directional impact protection system. So that gives you protection against angled, as well as the helmet itself, which will protect you against linear impacts. Companies like Uvex and Guardio, sort of in Europe, have also taken on that type of technology. But there's more movement towards rotational forces and protection against that, and you'll see that highlighted within new standards as they actually come on board. So, if we're thinking of it from a science perspective, then you need to be thinking of it from a wearing perspective and think about protecting, yourself more. That's super important. Next slide, please, Tess. Okay, so looking after your hard hat, I always, bang on about this. It's super important. Part of this week is all about this. So it's all about checking your hard hat or your safety helmet, checking it for deep scuffs or scratches, checking your chin strap, if you've got one currently at the moment, is in good condition. Please don't use any unchecked stickers or pen on the safety helmet. So when I say unchecked, I mean that there are some stickers where the adhesive is okay. Please get in contact with your manufacturer. They can check this out and let you know whether the adhesive that you're using will not have a reaction with the plastic in the hard hat or safety helmet. Obviously, check your helmet is CE marked and approved to a standard. Companies like the BSIF, so the British Safety Industry Federation, have a lot of companies on their books that supply helmets that obviously are approved to a standard. There are still some products that are available via things like eBay where they're not properly CE certified. So please be, super careful. And they're not comfortable. They might be, £4, £5 when you look at them. But please consider, A, you're protecting this, and B, sometimes you're wearing it 8 hours a day, so you want to be comfortable. Remember, the standard is the minimum level of protection. I see lots of specifiers that specify via the standard, look, let's raise the benchmark, let's not keep buying at the minimum level of protection, let's raise that benchmark and think, let's invest more in our hard hats and our safety helmets. Check your data manufacturer, look for the clock, and then check with your manufacturer of the hard hat to see how long these things last. Obviously, helmets that are exposed to UV constantly will deteriorate quicker, although they do have UV stabilizers in with the mixture, but nevertheless, be wary because they've been exposed obviously to UV. Don't wear any unlicensed headwear underneath your helmet. Hoodies and things like that, where you've got the hoodie up and the helmet on top, if it's not in contact with the head, it's going to come off. As soon as something hits, it's going to come off, and then you have subsequent impacts that can actually occur. It's not stable on the head. It needs to be in direct contact actually with the head. Manufacturers do beanies that will go underneath. They're specifically tested to make sure that there's no movement of the hard hat or safety helmet. So please be aware or approach your manufacturers to be able to buy them. Do not throw your safety helmet hard hat around. Years ago, there were videos of people trying to flick them up and get them to land on their head. It's not good practice. Once your helmet, safety helmet, hard hat has received a significant impact, then there may be a hairline fracture in the plastic that you can't physically see, that then exposes you to obviously higher degrees of injury if there's an incident or accident. And when not being used, place it in a bag or store it somewhere safe, sort of cool and dry. Look after it. It's looking after your life. Next slide, please, Tess. So what can you do to reduce the risk? So obviously understand head injuries, symptoms of concussion and things like that. Wear the correct head protection according to the risk. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Take regular breaks. Feed your brain. Junk food is okay occasionally, but obviously eat healthy, promotes cell growth. Please never think it won't happen to you. Lots of people out there, I don't need this. It never happened to me. Yeah, unfortunately, it does happen. So please look after yourself, look after your equipment because it may save your life. And please participate in Hard Hat Awareness Week. It's on every single year. It's generally around the second week in June. And sign up to understand head injuries more. And that's it for me. Next slide, please, Tess. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for listening. And I'll leave you to the rest of the experts.
Thanks, Chris. That was really interesting, particularly in relation to stickers on helmets. I wasn't quite aware that that can have such an impact on the plastic. Next, we're joined by Sarah Russell from the National Brain Injury Charity Headway. Sarah's been at Headway since 2020, and she's now their Senior Policy and Public Affairs Manager, and she leads on the charity's campaigning work. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm here to talk about who's under the hard hat. So we've got really interesting conversations around the importance of hard hats. We're going to hear a little bit later about some of the technical aspects around hard hats and their durability and all those things, really important. But I'm here to just talk a little bit more about the effects of what happens to you if you do end up having a brain injury. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Taz? Thank you. So a little bit of an outline of what Headway does. So we're a registered charity that have been operating in the field of acquired brain injury for over 40 years. And we support those survivors who have had a brain injury and their loved ones through every stage of the care pathway. And for some survivors, that can be a lifelong journey of rehabilitation and reablement. So you'll see across the top there on the left, I've got a little arrow pointing from the acute stage in hospital right through to continuing care in the community. And these are some of the services that Headway UK itself directly offers to individuals. So we have an emergency fund that's there dedicated to support families of loved ones in that acute phase. So travelling to visit loved ones in hospital that can be in neurorehabilitation units quite far from where people live and work can be a real challenge for some. And worrying about how you're going to pay for that travel and perhaps accommodation nearby can be a real stress. So we try and take that stress out of the situation for individuals by having an emergency fund that they can apply for. We also have a digital platform that's housed on our website called I'm Calling About Chris. Now, this was designed to ease the burden of the stresses and perhaps repeated traumas of having the same conversation with multiple family members and friends in relation to the status of your loved one and their prognosis and their current health. It's a digital platform where you can upload various pictures, resources, images, information about a loved one's prognosis that you can either have publicly facing for people to access whenever they want, or you can have a private login which you can give to family and friends to be able to access that information. We also have a brain injury identity card. Now, our identity cards are used by survivors to be able to more readily explain the effects of their brain injury. And survivors can make an application to Headway to get a card, and on the card you can list up to 3 effects of your injury, because we have had instances in the past where, for example, individuals who sustained a brain injury have been arrested whilst out in the public when individuals have thought they have been inebriated, for example, because they may have an unsteady walking gait, speech impediments or language challenges, and that has resulted in quite scary situations for some. So the identity card is recognised by the National Police Chiefs Council, but it's also used in a range of other scenarios. From a lot of survivors tell us they use it when they go to the shops or they go to the doctors or engagement with anyone really. So that card's available for people who've sustained an injury. Headway UK also supports a network of local groups and branches. So Headway groups across the country are independent charities in their own right, doing excellent work up and down the country, supporting people with rehabilitation and reablement services to help them relearn lost skills after they've sustained their injury and try and rejoin society and participate as fully as possible. And we also support a network of volunteer-led branches, which host support groups and coffee mornings and knitter natter sessions, that sort of thing, to help people deal with the effects of their injury on a peer-to-peer basis, with information available to them. We also have a nurse-led helpline. Our helpline is open to anyone who has been affected by brain injury, so survivors, family members, loved ones, but also professionals working in the field of brain injury or unrelated fields. Anybody who wants any information really in relation to acquired brain injury and its effects and how to support people living with it. We also have a suite of freely downloadable publications housed on our website, our award-winning website. My colleague Andrew would love me to tell you. So any publication in relation to the effects of acquired brain injury, how to deal with it, including helpful hints and tips on its effects and managing your symptoms. They're all available on our website, and we obviously host online communities where individuals can offer peer-to-peer support and tips and hints as well. And just down the right column there's some more sort of behind the scenes efforts that we have to predominantly raise awareness around acquired brain injury. So our training programs are offered to a whole host of audiences, individuals working in reablement services, local authorities, the criminal justice system, tailored training to raise awareness of acquired brain injury or specific aspects of acquired brain injury if that's what's required. We also have a justice programme. Our justice programme is tailored to try and raise awareness, particularly of acquired brain injury through the criminal justice systems in the UK. There's actually a particular prevalence of brain injury in individuals in prisons and offending institutions across the UK. So it's a really important programme that we try and raise awareness and the interaction between acquired brain injury and offending and the criminal justice system more broadly. We also have an approved provider scheme whereby residential settings, whether that's NHS hospitals or private hospitals, can make applications to our scheme. They have to meet certain criteria to be able to have our approved provider status, focusing on tailoring services to people living with acquired brain injury. And we run a rolling programme of reassessment for those approved providers to make sure they're still delivering services suitable for people living with acquired brain injury. And on our website, we also host a solicitors directory, which is a list of specialist solicitors with experience in handling brain injury cases. Of course, our friends at Irwin Mitchell are on our solicitors directory. You can access that online. And every solicitor featured on that directory has agreed to work within Headway's Personal Injury Lawyers Code of Conduct, which tells you everything you need to know about what you can expect from your solicitor in cases where you might need one. And then we also have a policy and public affairs function, which is what I manage on behalf of the charity, where we lobby change makers, decision makers for changes in policy and in some cases the law to improve the lives of those living with acquired brain injury. Thanks, Taz. Next slide, please. Okay, so Chris touched on this in his presentation, and one of the things that we seek to do as a charity, part of our mission, is to campaign to reduce the incidence of brain injury. So ideally, we don't want people to get brain injuries in the first place, because actually the effects of brain injury can be devastating and they can be lifelong and they can affect every aspect of a person's life. And one of the things that I'm going to touch on in the next slide is around prevalence of acquired brain injury. I don't think people actually realise the amount of people that suffer an acquired brain injury every year. And there are different types of brain injury. So at Headway, we deal in the term acquired brain injury, of which traumatic brain injury, which Chris focused on, is a type. So acquired brain injuries can happen, which is essentially an injury to the brain, and that can be caused in lots of different ways. So a non-traumatic acquired brain injury, the most common one you'd probably be familiar with, is a stroke. That is a form of acquired brain injury. Your injury to your brain can be sustained through a lack of oxygen to the brain, causing hypoxic brain injury. You could have a brain aneurysm, so a bleed on the brain, a different type, which could cause injury to the brain, or a tumor on the brain, which again could cause a trauma to the brain. There are different types of acquired brain injury. And then, of course, you've got your traumatic brain injuries, which is more broadly what we're here to discuss today. That's an external physical factor which impacts on the brain's function. So that can be a slip, trip or fall, or it could be a coup or contra coup injury in the head where you don't even necessarily, your head doesn't necessarily need to make an impact with anything. It could be a vigorous movement of the head that caused the brain to shake within the skull. That can be enough to cause a traumatic brain injury to the head. And if individuals sustain brain injuries, there are a series of fluctuating and often hidden symptoms that people can experience. And the main effects are listed there. So the ones that you are more likely to be able to see in an individual that sustained a brain injury are the physical effects. So things like weakness or paralysis, mobility problems, difficulty with speech and language, or fatigue often affect people. There are a series of emotional effects, so like personality changes, mood swings, depression, anxiety, frustration and anger can affect individuals living with acquired brain injury. And there are cognitive effects like memory loss, language loss, reduced motivation, reduced concentration, impaired reasoning and loss of insight or empathy. And there are different psychological and behavioural effects like disinhibition, impulsiveness, apathy, obsessive behaviours, irritability, and aggression. And they are just some of the issues that can impact a survivor's daily life. And it's important to recognise that not all survivors will exhibit every single one of those effects, and those who do won't display them constantly. But these are the types of things that can affect someone's life should they experience a brain injury, and they are particularly common, and I don't think people necessarily realise. Next slide, please, Taz. So we partnered with Chris proudly to launch Hard Hat Awareness Week, and we wanted to do it to drive awareness around brain injury and encourage, particularly in this instance, best practice around the use of hard hats. So we want people to understand what should happen if brain injury does actually occur, in the unfortunate instance that happens. So we use the strapline stop, report, recover. And that simple 3 steps is something that we continue to campaign on. You'll see some of the campaign materials on the screen there. A simple 3 steps that you can follow if you suspect you have sustained a head injury whilst at work. Stop what you're doing, recognise how you feel, report it to your line manager, and then recover before going back to your usual activities. And that recovery could be sitting in your workplace for 10 to 15 minutes while you have a cup of tea and just assess how you feel. Or it could be leaving the site altogether and coming back when you feel more able. Because actually, minor injuries to the head can result in particularly severe consequences, some of the ones I've listed in the slide previously. And sometimes it's not always easy to recognise those symptoms in yourself in the immediate aftermath of acquiring a brain injury. So take this away from today, please. Any minor knock to the head can result in significant consequences. So take your time, seek medical advice, and stop, report, and recover. Now, Chris touched on this. It's so easy for us to think that it will never happen to me. The amount of people that we support that said, I never saw it coming, came out of nowhere and completely changed my life. Actually, we don't realise the prevalence of acquired brain injury. On the best guess scenario we have now, on the data that's available, which is not very well collected or reported, if we're being honest, and it's something that we campaign on actively to get better reporting and recording of these instances. But approximately 350,000 individuals are hospitalised every day due to traumatic brain injury. So that's 1,000 a day acquired brain injury, enough to fill 13 double-decker buses. So 13 double-decker buses worth of people every single day admitted to hospital. So they are the ones that are admitted to hospital and recorded as being admitted to hospital. There are some which we know never get recorded, and there are even more which we know never present at hospital. So these are very conservative figures in that regard, but still significant numbers of individuals. Thanks, Taz. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just close on some feedback we got from a survey that we undertook in 2020 when we launched Hard Hat Awareness Week. And we would like to rerun this survey to see if there's been an impact and any change in the landscape in this area following the years of dedicated campaigning by Chris and others to raise awareness of this issue. But it produced some pretty stark statistics that we feel warrant more research, more work, and more campaigning. So 52% of people who sustained a head injury at work did not report it. And that was mainly because they didn't feel the injury was significant. It's important to recognise that all instances of injury should be reported, especially given that even seemingly minor blows to the head can lead to severe complications. And staying on site after an initial injury can increase the risk of damage from a second injury. And then you can get the cumulative impact of minor knocks to the head, which can be quite serious and severe. 58% of respondents wrongly painted, marked or applied decals or labels to their helmet. Now, Chris touched on this in his presentation too. because helmets are made from materials that have been specifically chosen for their durability and shock absorption, they can be particularly sensitive to chemical attack, and having inappropriate materials on the helmet can degrade that helmet and make it less suitable for protection in the workplace that you would want to see. And 15% stored their hard hat in an unsuitable way. So storing helmets in direct sunlight or extremes of temperature or ways that can distort the shell is not recommended and can reduce the life of the helmet. 24% of people were unaware that exceeding the expiry date can reduce protectivity. So following the expiry date, you can't be sure that the materials in the helmet will provide adequate protection in the event of an impact. So it's really important to monitor the expiry date and make sure that you're getting the maximum protection that you can from your protective gear. And 29% of respondents wear unlicensed headwear underneath their helmet. Now, obviously, Chris mentioned this too. I've never worked on a building site, but I can imagine the temptation to wear a warm hat during the colder months under your helmet is very much there, and being freezing on site is not great, but wearing anything underneath your helmet can greatly impact the fit and reduce the effectiveness of it, and it must be fit correctly to the wearer's head. Otherwise, it may well fail to protect you during an impact. So having a properly fitted helmet with nothing underneath, save those things that are specifically designed and tested to be worn underneath, should be discouraged. So I think the results of that survey showed that we did have more work to do. We've campaigned each year alongside Chris proudly to raise awareness of these issues, and I think there is more that can be done. So Headway continues to support calls for people to wear appropriate headgear in their workplace to protect them from acquired brain injury. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think 1,000 people a day sustaining a brain injury is quite a startling figure. Next, we have Dr. Chen and Rachel Tan. Dr. Chen is currently a lecturer at the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Sheffield. His research is focused on enhancing the understanding of traumatic brain injuries, the development of technologies aimed at protection, and the application of wearable sensors for the monitoring and prediction of brain injuries during impact and blast injuries. Rachel Tan has a master's in biomedical engineering from UCL before joining the HEAD lab as a research assistant at Imperial College in London. Her current research focuses on the safety, performance, and test protocols of helmets, aiming to better represent real-world impact scenarios, particularly concerning traumatic brain injuries. So over to you two.
Sorry, Anna, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name's Chen. I'm a lecturer in the University of Sheffield. I put my department's logo here this morning. It will disappear from the next slides because this work is primarily conducted at Imperial College London. So me and my colleague Rachel, we present this piece of work, and Dr. Mazda Gajari is our line manager and supervises this piece of research. Our presentation is about our current ongoing research about the safety helmets. We focus on testing helmets for trips and falls, and these two have been mentioned by Chris are the leading causes of traumatic brain injury in the workplace. Our final aim is to develop an industrial helmet rating program that allows us to test helmets, particularly the safety helmets like hard helmets, under more realistic conditions. We would like to acknowledge the financial support by MIPS and Innovate UK. This project is divided into two parts. The first part, computation modeling, are supported by Innovate UK, and the later, the testings are mainly supported by MIPS. We want to acknowledge their financial support. So a few figures here. I think Chris has already mentioned some of them, but I would like to emphasize a bit more about the percentage of work-related traumatic brain injuries. So actually, work-related traumatic brain injuries account for about around 18% of all TBI. So counting the overall like estimated 57 million TBIs occur worldwide annually, the work-related TBIs actually occurs a lot. And as Chris mentioned, there are different mechanisms by force, by vehicle collisions, being struck by an object, for instance, by a falling object, or struck by a machine, and even assault in the workplace. All these could lead to some kind of traumatic brain injuries. Then falls are the leading cause, over 50% of all work-related TBIs. And I want to emphasize particularly, actually falls from height are shown to produce more severe TBIs and more fatalities than any other mechanisms, as we could imagine if people fall from height, for instance, fall from the ladders or fall from the scaffoldings. These cases are more severe than, for instance, being struck by a vehicle or falls onto the ground, for instance, slip or trips. Then I want to talk about the current safety helmet testing standard. There are basically two testing standards. Here I'm showing the EN397 testing standard. This is the traditional testing standard mainly used for testing the hard hats. And there are another one which becomes more and more popular is called the EN12492 standard. Those are required for testing like mountaineering helmets or Type 2 helmets called in the United States. It's more for climbing engineering or climbing, or they call it climbing style. So both of these two testing standards, they mainly require the helmet to be tested under the falling objects. So mainly two types of falling objects. One is heavy falling objects, and then, for instance, they drop a 5-kilogram weight onto the crown. It's a free fall at the height of 1 meter to test like the force underneath, how much force can be accepted. Or they for sharp falling objects like 3 kilograms, but with a very sharp edge. They want to check whether the helmet is able to resist the penetration. For instance, after this test, the crown of the helmet cannot touch the headphone. But the problem is, all these are representing the falling objects. While falling objects impact only account for around 70% of all work-related TBIs, but the majority of the cases are caused by falls and trips. So trips is a unique type of falls. Falls can be divided into two categories: falls from height, which for instance fall from the ladder, or falls onto the same level, which is usually like slips or the trips. So falls are not represented, are not considered here. We think the key difficulty for this like drawback is that we actually don't know the head impact conditions resulting from falls. We want to test the hard hats against these conditions, but what are the impact conditions? How much speed is required? What is the angle? What is the location we impacted against? We don't know all these. So then initially this work was around finding out the representative head impact conditions in the workplace. So we finally end up with simulating the falling and trips cases. We firstly tried to search for evidences across like different databases, but actually, as Sarah mentioned, that a lot of these cases they were not reported or there is no video footage. We actually don't understand the case, like how people get impacted, how these traumatic brain injuries are created, what are the mechanism, what are the conditions, what are the objects like people's had impact against. And we next tend to search for information from online videos. We were thinking that like traffic accidents, there should be some video analysis, video resources, video footages on, for instance, YouTube, on these online platforms. Then we end up with finding a lot of like funny videos. People tend to upload like funny videos onto the online platforms, not those like real accidents, like accidents cause severe injury, which usually we could imagine those are brutal head impacts. But those online video platforms do not allow people to upload those brutal impacts. So if we use those online videos to do the analysis to find out the representative head impact conditions, we would definitely include a lot of bias. Then finally, we decided to simulate these cases using multi-body dynamic simulations. So the platform, the software package we use is called Medimo. So this is based on the multi-body dynamics simulations. Here I'm showing one case, one real injury case. If you could see that the worker on the platform, he lost balance, and unfortunately there is no handrails behind him, and he falls onto the ground. So this is like over 3.5 meters height. So this represents a quite severe injury case. Then this is Medimo simulation. We use Medimo simulations. We set up the simulation parameters the same with the injury case. For instance, the height, like the gesture, before before falling. Then we compared like the final impact speed and also the postures. We find good similarities between the simulation and the video footage. So this model is validated. Next, we use this model to simulate a large number of falls and trips cases. For instance, this is the trips cases. We simulate many of these cases by varying the different parameters. For instance, we put a barrier, a rectangular barrier on the ground. We varied the barrier width and the height, and whether the person has bracing gesture or no bracing gesture. And we also varies the initial velocity, like the walking velocity, and also the stances, which I will show later. Then for falls, we simulate two kinds of falls. Forward falls, which result in 576 cases. We also varies the foot to edge width, because this later we find it affects the head impact conditions quite significantly. And we also use different falling height. Then finally, we simulated the backward falls. The backward falls, they are less variable, so we simulated 144 cases. Then these are the also additional parameters we used. We simulate the cases with different size of the human body, like the fifth percentile female. This represents like a lower body size across the population. And then 50th male, this is the average size, and 95th male, this represents the upper bound of the in terms of the body size across the population. Then our walking gestures could be divided into 10 stances. So not all of them could lead to trips. For instance, the trips usually happens when one leg is stationary and the other leg moves towards and hits some barrier, and this causes falling. And the backward falls is the same when there is one leg is stationary and the other leg like lose balance because there is no support. So we assign these variables. For instance, for walking stances, for trips, we selected stance 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6. These are the cases that could lead to trips. And for foot to edge distances, we use different distances, and falling height, we come from 0.5 meters until 4 meters. That represent quite severe cases, like falling from scaffolding up to 2 levels. Here are the animations of trips and falls from the Medimo simulations. This is trips hit by a barrier, and this is forward falls. So we simplified these simulations by assuming there is no surrounding objects, so no interactions with the surrounding objects. Then we have all these around 1,700 cases. Then we process all these cases and find out the head impact conditions. Basically, we first process all these results to firstly determine whether there is a head impact event, because some of the cases they do not need to head impact. For instance, if the head impacts on the shoulder, or the shoulder impacts on the, sorry, this is moving by itself. For instance, the shoulder impacts on the ground first, so the head may not directly impact on the ground, or the head could impact on the arms. So this results in no impact. And the second observation is that actually a lot of this impact falls outside the helmet coverage. For instance, it happens on the back here, like for instance, under the coverage of the helmet. So these cases, we want to exclude them because helmets are not supposed to protect these cases. Then we post-processing all the other results. Actually, some key findings here. 41% of the backward force and 90% of the trips and backward force lead to head impact outside the helmet coverage, like this figure. So even for the backward force, as much as 41% of the cases, they do not lead to head impacts within the helmet coverage. And most trips and forward force lead to head impacts in the frontal region. This is easy to understand because the motion is forward. And most backward force lead to head impacts in the back region. This is also easy to understand. They have the backward falling motion. Then we post-processing these cases where a head impact onto the ground event is observed. These are the box plots. So when we get hold of this data, we find huge variations across different scenarios, like they have large variations everywhere. The distributions spread over a large spectrum. So then later we want to group them together into groups that can be analyzed. So we finally decided to distribute to use the impact angle as the x-axis. So we divide the impact angle into three categories: 0 degree to 30 degree, 30 to 60 degree, and 60 to 90 degree. Then we plot all these head impact conditions. For instance, the impact speed we plot in this line. And then for the impact location, we use two factors to describe the impact location: the elevation angle, which is the angle like between the impact point and our horizontal plane, and also the azimuth angle, which describe where the point is in terms of the vertical location. So these two parameters describes the location of the head impact on the head. Then next, we want to determine the representative head impact conditions from these plots. Then what do we mean by representative? We want to select the values from these box plots. We selected the 75th percentile speed because we believe actually the 75th percentile speed represents the upper bound of the injury severity. If we select the 75th percentile speed, we at least could cover the severity by 75th percentage. Right, and we select the mean values of the azimuth angles and the elevation angles. So finally, we resulted in 5 representative impact conditions: trips for 2, and forward force 2, and backward force only 1, because backward force, they only lead to head impact angles between 60 to 90 degrees. This means that backward force, they lead to more normal impact, less oblique impact. But please note that these are the conditions determined from the simulations. When we want to test the helmets in our lab settings, we still need to further refine these conditions because some of these cases we cannot test it in the lab settings. For instance, the backward force, the impact speed is 9.4 meters per second. We cannot replicate this condition in our labs because at this speed, we will damage our headphone and sensors. So we need to remove this and replace it with another condition. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the improvement in our testings here. So we are using the latest head form. This head form is regulated by the standard EN 17950 standard. So this is the latest one. This head form mainly have 2 improvements. The first improvement is the coefficient of friction across the surface is more realistic. It's close to real human head, because human head we have a roughly like a smooth surface. Secondly, the moments of inertia. The moments of inertia is a physical property that determines the rotational motion of one object. So compared with traditional head forms like largely used in testing helmets, for instance, the Hybrid 3 head form, this head form was originally developed for car crash tests. This head form is more close to real human head. In this paper, in our earlier study, I compared these two head forms. I find that there are huge differences between them. So now in the later test, we use this latest head form is more representative. This is a big improvement in testing the helmets. I want to also talk a bit more about the injury mechanisms. In all these tests later, my colleague Rachel would introduce the test results. We measure two things. One is the translational or linear motion of the head form. The translational motion of the head form mainly like is mainly linked to some pathologies of head injury, for instance, the skull fracture. Skull fracture is mainly caused by direct head impact onto something rigid, so that creates like localized large forces. That is, if it's large enough, it could cause skull fracture. So these kind of pathology is mainly caused by translational motion of the human head. Usually, traditionally, it's called the G-force. And focal injuries like localized brain tissue injuries, because of the large linear motion, the brain tissue surface could in contact with the skull surface and cause a large, like a contusion surface. This is linked to the focal injuries. We also want to measure the rotational motion of the human head. Rotational motion is mainly linked to pathologies like subdural hematoma. Subdural hematoma is created by the rupture of the bridging veins. We have bridging veins in our head which collects the brain tissue and the skull. If the head is subject to large rotation, those bridging veins would be pulled, and if it's large enough, it can be ruptured, and blood comes out from those ruptured locations. Also, another very prevalent injury pathology is the diffuse axon injury. This is caused by the axons being sheared during the large rotational motion of the human head. So these two measurements, they are both very important. They represent different risk. They represent risk of different injury pathologies. So with this head form, we are able to measure both of them. We have accelerometers and gyroscopes fixed inside the head form. So these two measured both the translational and the rotational motions. The gyroscope measures the rotational acceleration. The rotational velocity. And we first smooth the data using a filter. And then next, we differentiate the rotational velocity curve to find out the rotational acceleration. So later, my colleague Rachel would explain more details about how we test the helmets, the test environment, the setups, etc. But before I move to, I give it to Rachel. I want to have some forecastings about our workshop in this September. So this September, by that time, we would have more tests done on different hard hats, different safety helmets, and we would conduct in-depth analysis of the results and also the simulations. We want to present the state-of-the-art research in this area during the workshop, and we also want to discuss the implications for different stakeholders like helmet manufacturer, like charities, like headways, and also like injury solicitors. Then we want to identify solutions to some of the key existing challenges, particularly, for instance, access to the high quality real world data. As Sarah just mentioned, that the data is actually quite limited. A lot of unreported cases. There is no video footages in most cases. So we want to discuss those together with different stakeholders. It will be held at Imperial College London. It's free, and people can join online as well if they cannot come to London. So if you need more information, please feel free to contact Masdak for more information. We will also release more information shortly. Rachel, it's over to you. Oh, I should stop sharing.
Yep, thank you, Chang. Yeah, so just pick off from the testing that Trent mentioned. So in his presentation, he talked about kind of picking out the representative parameters for testing. So here you can see in purple is the simulation parameters. And so with this, we actually did some pilot testing according to these parameters outlined in purple. And then subsequently made adjustments to the finalized selection of 5 impact conditions you see here highlighted in yellow. So significantly you see that it has ended up with only 1 trip condition. So trip 1 was excluded because of a very low impact speed, which kind of resulted in insignificant results as all the helmets kind of performed rather similarly. And then we included another 4 to 2, which is to simulate an impact that's closer to the helmet rim. As we know that as it goes closer to the helmet rim, it leads to higher kind of injury mechanics. And then for 4.3, which is the backward 4, as Chen mentioned, the impact speed of 9.5 is beyond the capability of our test environment, and so we ended up with choosing 5.5, which actually leads us to a very similar impact parameters to 4.2.1, which is at the front, so we can get a good representative of the test at the front and the rear of the helmet to see a comparison between the helmet. Other than that, also we included 2 surface conditions, so both the roof shingle and also the PAFT surface conditions. So roof shingles are mainly to simulate a concrete surface for environments that are mainly indoors, and then the PAT abrasive paper simulates a road surface that's normally rougher. Also to highlight in terms of azimuth angle, you can see that it is very much simplified here from 0, 45 to 180 degrees. So this is to allow us to streamline the whole testing process and allow more repeatability between each test. So in today's presentation, I'll mainly focus on 2 impact conditions. So for 2.1, you see at the front of the head, and then 4.3, which is at the rear of the head. And then these are high-speed videos that are captured from a camera that's positioned behind the anvil. And these videos are mainly for us to document the whole process, to allow verification of each test and ensure that it's performed correctly, especially to ensure that the helmet is maintained at a proper position during the fall and also right before the impact. So these are the helmets that we've tested. So it includes Type 1 and Type 2 helmets. So Type 1 are the typical industrial helmets that are passing the EN 397 standards. And then Type 2 are mostly climbing style helmets that includes the EPS foam, and then also pass additional tests such as the EN 12492, which is mainly for mountaineering standards. So to conduct our experiment, so we first fitted the helmet onto the head foam to ensure it's properly fitted. To note that most of the typical hard hat helmets has no chin straps, so we actually purchased chin straps from the manufacturers to have them attached. So to ensure that all helmets are tested in the same condition. And then afterwards, we then moved it to the test rig and adjusted the head foam to the required position using inclinometer and also the laser that is specifically for the azimuth angle. We have high-speed cameras and then lightings in place prior to the impact. And then these head foam, as Chan mentioned, were equipped with sensor packages that are with a wireless data logger that we can obtain the data from after the impact, and also enable us to then measure both the linear acceleration and the rotational velocities along the three axes. And then filtering was done, and so we can collect and calculate peak values of the linear acceleration, rotational acceleration, and also rotational velocity that we then used as a head injury metrics. So looking at this graph here, so in the next few slides, you'll see similar graphs going on. So I'll just explain a bit about what these graphs are. So these graphs are actually plotted time history of the three head injury metrics that we're looking at. So linear acceleration, rotational acceleration, and rotational velocity. Just from an overview, we can see there are quite significant differences in the head response for each helmet, even among helmets of the same type. So, for example, type 1 helmets and type 2 helmets. So focusing on the linear acceleration graph alone, we see that between there are like pointy beats in the V-Guard and also the height master helmets. And so these are actually called what we call bottom out. So bottoming out is where the kind of energy absorbing material is fully compressed during the impact, and then force is directly transferred to the head form, which results in a significant increase in the risk of injury, as evidenced in the elevated linear acceleration we see. And typically when we see that a PLA, so peak linear acceleration above the threshold of 250 G, it indicates kind of a 50% risk of skull fracture. And then in terms of rotational motion itself, we see that the impact conditions don't actually produces relatively lower rotational matrix, about 4 kiloreds, as compared to things we know in like a bicycle accident that can reach up to 20 kiloreds. And so this is because mainly of the oblique impact we see. So these are impacts on a 75-degree angle as compared to a bicycle helmet does. And so then moving on to the roof shingle, we see that actually we observe kind of a lot difference in performance, especially looking at the height master helmets that right now, because of the because of the change of the surface, we see that it does not bottom up anymore. So looking at the effects of the helmet design features, so just focusing on the typical Type 1 helmets without the EPS, we can observe that the additional design features such as the hump affects not only the repeatability of the helmet protection, but also increases the rotational motion of the helmet. And then looking at the effects of surface condition that we mentioned before, that are the roof shingle and then the PAT. So yeah, we can see significant effects on the helmet performance between these two surfaces, where there's an increase in rotational motion, but a decrease in linear acceleration. And this is very important to consider, as especially these helmets would be used in a various different working environments. And so knowing knowing that the helmet can safety performance can actually change so much based on the surface condition is very important. So in this scenario, we observe a clear distinction between two helmet types. So especially in looking at the climbing style helmets, we record the PLA values that are way below the 250 G threshold, and notably, but then when we see the Type 1 helmets, we can see that there's bottoming out, but then the issue is not repeated in the V-Guard helmets. So this is likely due to design features again, where the V-Guard helmets does have two humps at the back of the helmet, and so then changes the results based on the impact location. And under the roof shingle, again, we see repeated similar performance between all of the 4 helmets. So even with just these 2 impact conditions, the front and the back of the helmet, we can clearly observe distinction in helmet performance even within the same model. For example, this concept peak helmet, which performed really well in its peak linear acceleration at the front of the head, yet it consistently bottom out when it's tested at the rear of the helmet, despite both conditions having the same parameters, except that is one at the front and one at the back. And so further investigation would then be required. But this discrepancy may be due to the design features between the front and the back of the helmet. So just looking at some conclusions we've made. So from the representative parameters we've selected itself, we can see that some helmets actually do fail under specific conditions, mainly from the linear acceleration point of view, where they do exceed the 250 threshold. This could be an indication of quality control, where we see in the test results that there are poor repeatability, and this may be because that the helmets are not actually designed for these impact conditions, and therefore it can also further lead to inconsistency in how this helmet would protect in a real life scenario. Yeah, also key findings from our parameters itself. So firstly, the surface condition, even with the same helmet, but just changing surface condition itself, we can either fail or pass the helmet. And then looking at the impact condition, both the front and the rear of the helmet, even at the front, it can be doing really well, but we can see consistent bottoming out when we test at the rear of the helmet. So then I think a very interesting question would be, is climbing style helmets any better? So climbing style helmets with the inclusion of EPS foam generally do improve helmet protection, but it does not entirely prevent the bottoming out in certain impact scenarios. One very key kind of observation we've seen is that actually this EPS foam coverage varies between different helmets. So in this picture, you can see that there are empty areas without EPS coverage in one helmet, but then the other helmet, the entire circumference is actually surrounded by EPS foam. And this is very unlike bicycle helmets, where the thickness and consistency of use of EPS is quite consistent in helmets, and therefore when we look at safety construction hard hats, we can see varied performance even with the inclusion of EPS foams. So in summary, I think we saw how design differences of the safety helmets does affect its performance a lot, and the differences can include the way EPS are included in the helmets, design features like the harms, and also the surface finishing, such as glossy or even the matte. And we do hope to advocate more on the evaluation and development of testing protocols to include these representative head impact conditions, so that we can enable the helmets to further protect trips and fall, as we see how it's one of the main causes of injury in the workplace. So we would finally extend this testing to include more helmets, and the results would be disseminated in the workshop in September that Cheng has previously mentioned. Yeah, so thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rachel and Cheng. We've had a few questions in.
Yep.
If we go to Chen and Rachel then first, why do you think testing standards have been focused on falling objects only when they account for only 17% of work-related brain injuries? Do you think it's a lack of awareness around how head injuries are caused, or a reluctance to invest in better testing?
Thanks, Anna. Well, this is a very good question. Actually, we had got this question as well when we started this research. Things like falls and trips, they account for like over 50% of the injury scenarios. Why people has not started looking at it? To be honest, I don't know. But my perception towards this question is that I feel manufacturers or like site managers on the construction side or on the warehouse, they tend to believe that trips and falls can be prevented by better trainings. For instance, let's say trips and falls, this is more likely to be conducted by the people themselves, if you allow me to use the word conducted. So by better trainings, identifying potential hazards, and then to have some like additional warnings, stuff like that, that people feel it can be avoided. But falling objects, the perception is that it cannot be avoided. You cannot avoid falling objects impacted by better trainings, because you cannot anticipate that this is not something that within your control. It's external falling objects. So probably this is one of the reasons that people focus on the falling objects resistance rather than the falls and trips, because falls and trips you could avoid that by better training. And another reason I think I explained a little bit in the presentation is that the lack of data. You also mentioned this. We actually don't know the head impact conditions. That every case is so different. So if we want to test it, what are the testing conditions? For falling objects, it's very easy to identify the conditions, just falling objects, whether it's sharp or it's heavy. But falls, every case is so different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just
sorry, Rachel, go on.
Rachel.
Oh, yeah, I think just to add on a bit, like when we think about walking at height, we think about PPE, and then there's a lot of like different PPEs, like use of safety harnesses or boots that prevents the slip and fall, and therefore helmets are probably forgotten about when thinking about falling from a height.
Thank you. Sarah, this is for you. You see firsthand the impact that brain injuries can have on people. As more is now being done to raise awareness of wearing a hard hat, particularly in the workplace, do you think there has been a reduction in the people sustaining head injuries at work, or do you think we still have a long way to go before we see that?
Thank you, Anna, for the question. Really interesting. And actually, the truth is we don't know. And I'll sort of separate this out into two sections, I guess. I touched on this in the presentation, that there's this issue around data. So recorded instances of presentation with acquired brain injury, whether that's in a hospital or other healthcare setting, and then what we see anecdotally. So there's an underreporting, we know that, whether that's actually recording instances at hospital appropriately, because that doesn't happen each and every time, even at presentation to hospital, let alone presentation to a GP or emergency unit, walk-in unit. It is widely known that that's not recorded appropriately, but also there's underreporting in the workplace itself. So we know that people don't actually report to their line manager if they've sustained a bump to the head. So the data is not there really to give us that indication. What I can tell you anecdotally from a headway perspective is that we have not seen a decrease in the number of people that we are supporting with acquired brain injury, including sustaining those injuries whilst at work. And actually what we're seeing is an increase in the numbers, but also the complexity of the effects of people that they're facing with different comorbidities. So not just an acquired brain injury, but a whole host of other challenges that come with the acquired brain injury. So it's a two-parter really. I think there's much more that we can do, and anything that we can do to raise awareness of acquired brain injury, its prevalence, the importance of how you deal with it, I think is so important, and why we continue to support Hard Hat Awareness Week.
Absolutely, thank you. And Chris, we've got time for one more question, which will be finishing with you. You speak at global events about the importance of wearing head protection and the impact of brain injuries. Do you notice a big variation globally between countries about how they promote awareness of brain injuries and head protection?
Yeah, thanks for that, Anna. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely over the last probably year and a little bit, places like the US have become more and more aware of head injuries, and they over there they have a standard that has two types, a type 1 and a type 2, which gives higher impact protection, and a lot of companies out there are moving to the type 2 helmets. So certainly, places like the US, of course I'd like the UK to be leaders in this, and for companies to accelerate and increase the amount of protection that they give their workers. So I'd certainly like to see that. Europe, so places like Germany have become more aware through companies, advertising around the importance of head protection. And in Germany, they have insurance companies as well that back wearing obviously a better hard hat from like a life insurance, accident insurance type policy. So certainly, there's definitely more awareness out there, but of course it could always be better, because as we've heard from our speakers today, it's super important to think about protecting that bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the webinar helpful. If you do have any questions, then please get in touch with either myself or any of the speakers who've spoken today. And just a reminder, if you could please complete the feedback form. It'd be much appreciated. The link should have been sent to you to complete. Thank you.